2023, I invited Richard to Exeter Cathedral to speak at Holy Ground on Love Yourself. And this book has developed from that evening and the conversations that took place. And I can think of no one better qualified to write this book. Richard's a man of spiritual depth, a licensed lay minister, a Benedictine oblat, initially supported by Alton Abbey and now supported by Mutnell, and his wife and daughter are both Anglican priests. And I think also within his experience of writing this book, he's brought to bear his experience as a former mental health and employment specialist, for which he was appointed an MBE for services to mental health in 2018. So I think he really understands the importance of loving yourself. Going back a number of years ago, Bishop Robert hosted Richard's book launch of Life with St Benedict at the Palace in Exeter. Some of you might have been there for that book launch. And since then, Richard's written 6 more books. We clearly use the pandemic very wisely. Finding stability in times of change, a story to tell, learning from people who met Jesus, and 3 novellas, the first of which was a Turner Book Award finalist in 2023. And many of you may know he also writes a blog and presents a podcast with a very memorable name, Work.Rest.Pray.com. We all know where that might have arisen from. So I'm delighted to commend Richard and his latest book, Loving Yourself. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Richard, who's going to give an outline for this evening and also introduce 3 more of our guests today who will be singing.
So the next kind of 30 minutes or so, I'll introduce you to this new book, Loving Yourself, this one here, which has been published by SLG Press. Now, SLG Press is a small publishing house run by the Community of the Sisters of the Loving God, hence SLG. It's an Anglican contemplative convent in Oxford, and it started this business of publishing books back in 1967. So they've been going a long time, and they've earned a very international reputation as well for short, high-quality works of Christian spirituality. I'm delighted that this book is one of their latest publications. Deborah mentioned that this has come out of a talk I was invited to give a couple of years ago. Deborah and I have known each other for about 10 years. We worked together quite a lot when she was team vicar on the Totnes team, and we continued that work together as part of the monthly Celebrating Health and Wholeness service here at the Cathedral on the 4th Sunday evening of each month. So that was back in 2023, and after a bit of a gap, I thought actually this could be something that could be developed a little bit more. So I did some further reading through social media and other means. I invited people to send me their personal thoughts on loving yourself or loving themselves. And then I happened to come across SLG Press publications and saw that as a potential outlet, and so here we are today. But before I go on to talk about the book itself, it's my pleasure to welcome Socks and Slippers, who are Andrew Down, Adrian Howell and Dan Livingston, to sing the first of 3 songs for us this evening.
So we're going to play 3 of our songs that are really inspired by our favourite poets and our favourite poems. We're going to sing a song version of a poem by R.S. Thomas that I'm sure many of you will know, The Brightfield. We'll play something by Mary Oliver, and we'll finish with something by Seamus Heaney later on. But let's start with The Brightfield by R.S. Thomas. and gone on my way, and forgotten it. But that was the pearl of great price. The one peel that had treasure in it. I realize now that I must give all that I have to possess. Life is not rushing on, or hankering after the past. It's turning aside like Moses to a brightness transitory as your youth. But it's eternity that awaits you. Seen the sun break through to illuminate a small field for a while, and gone on my way and forgotten it. But that was the pearl of great price. The one field that had treasure in it.
Thank you very much, and more from you a little bit later on. As you may know, often at book launches the author reads various chunks and chapters from the book, but as this is such a short book, I'm not going to read much from it because that rather defeats the object of you then buying it. But I will give you an overview of each of the 5 chapters and drop in a couple of quotes along the way. So first, a little bit from the introduction. What I should have said at the beginning is that the foreword to this book is very kindly written by Deborah Parsons. You shall love your neighbour as yourself is one of Jesus' best known and most quoted sayings. Now, of course, we might not always love or even like our neighbours, whether living on the same street or knowing them at work or through church or elsewhere. However, probably most of us feel comfortable with the love your neighbour part of Jesus' words. Thinking of others, being kind to people. Yes, I can do that, you might say. But what about as yourself? To have love for ourselves in the same way as we love others. It's a bit more tricky, isn't it? So this book explores the background and the context of Jesus' words, what it means, what it doesn't mean to have love for ourselves, and how we can love ourselves in a way that enables us to love our neighbour. The book also considers and offers some very practical suggestions, and those of you who are familiar with my other books will know that one of my core drivers in writing is to enable people to actually live this faith we believe in, to be able to relate to the words that they're reading, be that fiction or faith. To think about how faith manifests itself in the day-to-day, in the ordinary, the extraordinary, the agony and the ecstasy, bringing that faith to life. And the book also wrestles with some of the trickier aspects of loving ourselves, and no doubt covers other aspects that you can think of. So chapter 1 lays the context of Jesus' words, which were spoken to a scribe or a lawyer, and in which he's quoting Old Testament teaching, where the words "love your neighbour as yourself" first appear. Now Jesus calls these words the second commandment, and it is of course reminiscent of the more ancient teaching of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But it takes it one step deeper. It draws on the teaching of others from more recent times as well, people like Tom Wright and Walter Trobish, and includes comments from some of the people who gave me their personal views on the topic of loving themselves. So in that chapter, in the first chapter, I also deliberately throw in some counter views. This is a complex topic, this. So for example, one of the people who contacted me wrote this: "I think this loving ourselves is a non-issue. I don't think Jesus ever intended to promote loving ourselves." I also quote a priest who wrote this: "You can't love yourself, not really. Love requires more than one person, one to love and one to be loved. Love flows between two people, plural. Mostly, people don't need any excuse or opportunity to love themselves, to be selfish and mean and greedy and lazy and so on." So I think it's important to consider those views, as many people feel uncomfortable with this aspect of human living, particularly, sadly, in a church or Christian context. Chapter 2 then begins to explore what we mean by love and what the Bible says about it, and how this helps us have an increased understanding of ourselves. So let me read a little bit more for you. Loving ourselves is not putting ourselves first above absolutely everything and everyone else, but having sufficient self-care in place that we're able to love our neighbours in a way that is beneficial to them and not diminishing of ourselves. Loving ourselves means being realistic about who we are and not comparing ourselves to others. Theodore Roosevelt is credited with saying, "Comparison is the thief of joy." Or as a fellow American, the novelist Anne Lamott, put it like this: Try not to compare your insides with other people's outsides. And St. John Bertrand, so going back one time, wrote this: "Our worth, our true worth, does not consist in what human beings think of us. What we really are consists in what God knows us to be." Unquote. I don't believe that God demands as much from us as we often think he does. The love of God means that God has realistic expectations of the person we are. Therefore, loving ourselves also means having realistic expectations of who we are. Loving ourselves is a matter of balance. And balance is one of the key principles within the book, a balance between loving our neighbour and having love for ourselves. And chapter 2 then continues with thinking about the story that we tell ourselves. What's the narrative that we live with, the narrative that goes on inside our head? For example, many people identify themselves according to the shadows and situations they live with, sometimes losing that sense of who they actually are. You know, there's people we meet who, for example, introduce themselves by telling you what their health problems are, or what their grumbles with the church are. Not that those aren't important, but they're sometimes indicators that that person has lost the ability to like, let alone love, the person they are. And the church's teaching on this topic has not always been helpful either. Walter Trobish, a 1960s, 70s psychologist and writer, wrote this: He wrote that many Christians live with a misconception about Christian modesty and humility. So it is all right to feel good about ourselves. Held in balance, it's not selfish or self-indulgent. Loving ourselves is the ability to look in the mirror and to have love for the person we see. To love ourselves because God loved us first. Hence, in part, the lovely illustration that is on the front of this book.
So we're going to play in response to what Richard has spoken about. We're going to play a song inspired by Mary Oliver's Wild Geese.
Chapter 3 then goes on, how do we know and understand that love that God has for us? So within that chapter I take one particular angle, which is looking at the concept of having a pure heart. Now that takes us a little bit more into more subjective language, and how our heart is influenced by and influences our view of ourselves and our neighbours. And we use language that, you know, like my heart's not in it, or we talk of having a heavy heart. The concept of a pure heart goes back to Old Testament times, notably in the Psalms and then in Jesus' teaching. So blessed are the pure in heart, for example. And it comes through also in the teaching and experience of the desert mothers and fathers. Now, one modern-day writer, Mark Kutilowski, wrote this: "The work of purifying the heart is the spiritual journey from who we think we are to our deeper self, hidden with Christ in God. And it is this deeper self that is capable of both attaining inner peace and of being a gift and a blessing to others." So by nurturing this love, this purity of heart, we receive and experience love at ever deeper levels within our own hearts, and that in turn enables us to love our neighbour as ourselves. So you might well be saying, well, Richard, that's all very good for the desert mothers and fathers, but you know, this is me, this is who I am. So chapter 4 outlines some spiritual approaches initially that we can take. So contemplative, other forms of prayer, the use of silence, the use of scripture, to help develop both purity of heart and giving that intentional attention to God. One of the people who wrote to me wrote it like this: "What I have found helpful in learning to love myself is spending time in God's presence and learning how he feels about me. That he loves me because he is love, and not because of what I can't and can do." The final chapter then considers some very practical aspects of showing and giving love to ourselves. There are thoughts on well-being, as perhaps you might expect given my background, and that concept of feeling good and functioning well, and what indicators there are when we're not feeling good and functioning well. As left unaddressed, those signs can lead to other difficulties in our health and well-being. And sadly, I've seen that happen to far too many people. People who've given everything to everything and are left with nothing for anything. So part of loving ourselves is to know our own responses and reactions during times of feeling stressed or when we're not feeling that good and not functioning well. So feeling good and functioning well is just one part of loving ourselves, partly for its own sake, but also in order that we might love our neighbour too. So how do we go about feeling good and functioning well? How do we, in very practical ways, love ourselves amidst daily stresses and pressures? Well, you have to buy the book to find out. But I will give you a couple of examples. We live in a this-minute, last-minute society. On the one hand, there's an expectation for things to be done straight away. On the other, so much is attempted with little or no time left to complete it. There's so much pressure to expect and provide fast and immediate action. And there's some distinctly poor role modelling that goes on with it. We've cultivated a society of unnecessary rushing. And taking that time to think, to pray, to seek advice will, even if the speed of response is slower, often produce a much better and more fulfilling outcome. Another example is how we need to know when to say no. I remember one instance when somebody said to me, "The problem is, Richard, one can't say no to people." My reply rather took him by surprise. Took me by surprise when I said it, actually. I said, "Well, what makes you think you're the right person to say yes?" He may have thought I was being rude, and perhaps I was. But the ability to say no and signpost it to somebody else not only of love for ourselves, but for our neighbour as well, in equipping and enabling others. So being able to recognise these signs within us can be fundamental to that loving ourselves.
I just wondered if it might be worth saying something about why we published the book. SLG is a very small publisher. There are 2 members of part-time staff, and we publish small books about prayer. We have sort of niche publishing because we don't have to make a profit, and that means we can publish small books that lots of publishers wouldn't take on because they're too short and they don't like cheap books on their shelves. And I think quite a lot of what we do is quite conventional. The press is owned by a convent of Anglican sisters. And when Richard's book came across my desk, I sort of looked at it and thought, ooh, it's not quite what we usually do. But it was very, very engaging. I mean, it sort of sucked us in. And I handed it to our internal readers, all of whom are over the age of 80. But who do understand things like the internet. And I think one of the things that was very attractive was how Richard drew on contributions from other people, contributions from his social media communications. And that was very fascinating. But also there were a number of just wonderfully pithy moments, and the one that absolutely stayed with me was the one about, oh, it's so hard not to say no to people. And what makes you think you're the right person to say yes? And it made me just laugh out loud because so many of us do that. And I think one of the things that was so important about the book was that it addresses this fundamental problem that we all have. And I noticed that your audience here is primarily women. And I think this is something that women suffer with really badly, accepting ourselves and loving ourselves and accepting that we're good enough. And it was something that this book went into. And so it is a slight departure for us, but it's a very, very happy departure. And we felt it was a really important book and one that I think is one that we're extremely glad to have published. And I hope will do well.
It's lovely of you to say all that. Thank you ever so much indeed. And again, for all your support within it. It was interesting what you said, Julia, there about female audience, because that was said to me by somebody in our local church when I was selling copies after the service. Somebody came up to me and said, "I bet it's just women buying this, is it?" And I think it's predominantly women, certainly, and but a couple of men as well, and a mixed audience. I think coming to the cathedral launch next week, and I think it does speak of that gender difference, but I think there's also that element of men not admitting to it as well. So I think it's kind of how we can reach people of all ages and genders.
It didn't read as specifically directed as women. And certainly I could certainly see it speaking particularly to younger men who felt quite insecure about what they were doing. And that came out in the comments that came from your sort of Facebook and other responses, that there were a lot of men who had worked out things and other men who were just having real trouble trying to work it out. And you didn't just say, oh, that's really difficult to do. You actually talked about how to deal with it and how to do what you want to do. And I think a lot of people avoid that. So I think it was quite a courageous book in the sense that it didn't just raise questions, it offered answers.
Thank you. Juliet.
Yeah, I've just been listening. I didn't really know what to expect, and obviously it's different to your novels that I've read. Yes. And first of all, I just love the fact that commandment that we all know so well. You spent time on the first bit, because I don't think we do. And I don't, just even contemplating, what does that mean? What's that all about? And with the world that we live in, of positive thinking, and on the one sense, and then well-being on another, and people having to act out, and all, there's such a complex world out there. And so whatever causes people to pick up the book, I think it's actually a very important place to start, and to link to actually who is God and what's our relationship with God, and why is it important. that we love ourselves.
Mm.
So it's given me a lot of, I will buy the book.
Thank you.
But, pause.
When I read the book, was very much struck by the line about not comparing your inner self to somebody's outward self. And I actually think there's something about that really encapsulates what the book is about as a whole, in that actually a lot of our call to love ourselves is about loving the very depths of our being, not just what we see externally, or perhaps not even what we know about our character, but that it's a very deep kind of love that we are called to inhabit. But I just for me that is the quote that has stood out from the book, really, that I think you've really nailed that in what you've written.
Thank you.
So our final song is a version of a very beautiful poem called Lightning's Eight by Seamus Cooper. It has a beautiful image of a ship in it, so I was very attracted to it, and so this is our version of it.
Thank you again for coming. The various kind of sources that I've kind of used or referenced in the book, if you want to look into anything a bit more deeply. And there's a list of other SLG Press publications there as well. Indeed, someone I know is considering using this book as part of a house group, small group discussion setting. And I know that SLG can arrange a discount on multiple copies. And one of the things that's touched me as I've kind of looked to try and sell these books over the years is the number of people who've come along and bought a book that I've written for somebody else that they know. So maybe actually you're just thinking, actually, yeah, I do know somebody who may benefit from hearing some of this stuff or reading some of this stuff. So this particular book, Loving Yourself, is priced £7. I'm happy to obviously chat further. I can take card, cash or cheque. I bought copies of my other books that Deborah gave a mention to at the beginning. So there's 3 other faith books and then 3 contemporary fiction novellas. They're not overtly religious, but they're stories of adversity over hope. No, they're not. That's a good
over adversity.
Thank you, my prompts. They are stories of hope over adversity, and all with happy endings. And let me finish by reading a couple of lines from Deborah's foreword. This is a book to linger with and to apply to daily living and spiritual practice. It is a book that is compassionate and realistic, honest and accessible, offering down-to-earth tips born from lived experience and forged in the furnace of life. There is something in it for everyone. Drink deeply from this wisdom well and trust that the living water it contains will nourish the parched or dry places in yourself.